Hi there, Pastor Josh here, and desperately in need of a haircut. Sometimes I'll find myself going into my kitchen because I'm really thirsty, but instead of getting something cold to drink or something healthy to drink like water that will quench my thirst, I'll turn to coffee instead. I really enjoy coffee, and often I'm tired, so I'll go for the coffee instead, even though I know that coffee won't quench my thirst. And in fact, it will do the opposite of that. And I'll still drink that instead, even though there's a tap right there in my sink that I could be accessing and getting as much cold water as I wanted to from. I prefer coffee and I prefer other drinks to water, even though water in that moment, water overall, but especially in that moment when you're thirsty, water is the best thing that you can drink. I feel like we do that sometimes with our spiritual lives too, though, don't we? Like we can be feeling spiritually drained or spiritually dead or maybe empty or down. And instead of going to the source of living water, instead we turn to other things to try and fill ourselves up with. Things like work or busyness, maybe entertainment and social media, or shopping. There's a whole host of other things that we prefer to go to instead of to Jesus himself. And yet he's the only one that can satisfy our spiritual thirst. At one time, he met a woman at a well, and he asked her for something to drink, and she kind of was like, "What? Why are you asking me?" And he replied, saying, "If you knew who I was, you would ask for me for a drink of water." And he says, everyone who drinks the water from the well will be thirsty again, but whoever drinks the water I give them will never thirst. Indeed, the water I give them will become in them a spring of water welling up to eternal life. And so Jesus is available to us if we'll go to him. He'll give us water that will satisfy our souls. And more than that, it will spring up. It'll become in us a spring of water welling up to eternal life. And that eternal life he's talking about is not salvation. It's not eternal life that happens after we die or at some point in the future, like when Jesus returns. But it's eternal life that begins now within inside of us. It's a qualitatively different kind of life. It's spiritual life rather than spiritual death or spiritual emptiness or dryness. And of course, one of the main ways that we come to Jesus is through his word. And I don't know where you're at in your spiritual life. I know that this pandemic has affected people in different ways. Some people have grown closer to Jesus throughout the pandemic. They've depended on him more. Other people have grown farther away from Jesus, just bogged down by everything that's going on around them. The promise is, though, that if we come to Jesus, he will give us eternal life. Again, not salvation he's talking about, but he will fill our souls, he will fill our spirits with abundant, joyful life. And as we come to him, as we turn to him and make time for him daily, I would say, he fills us. We experience his love more, and we renew our minds so that we begin to see the external circumstances around us. We begin to see ourselves more the way that God sees them. And we begin to understand them in light of God's sovereignty, in light of God's goodness, in light of his love. Now, for many of us, that seems impossible. How can we look at what's going on in the world today, not even just with the pandemic, but lots of other things, and say, how can I understand these things? How can God be good in these cases? How can God be sovereign in these cases? But as we spend time with him, as we get to know his heart, as we get to know his voice, our minds are renewed. Paul uses the term, our minds are renewed, and we begin to understand him and see reality and see God for who he really is. So, do not give up. And do not give up on Jesus, even if you have so far. Come to Jesus. He will give you living water. And that's one of the best things we can receive. I would say it's the best thing we can receive. And the best things for our soul to receive. Well, that's it for me for today. God bless, and I'll see you soon.